The subcommittee will come to order. Good morning. I would like to welcome everybody to our first Oversight hearing, the first one of the 118th Congress. We are here today to review VA's implementation of the PACT Act and to discuss potential areas for improvement. The PACT Act was the largest expansion of benefits for veterans and their survivors in decades. It is a vital piece of legislation to ensure that toxic exposed veterans and their survivors finally receive their earned benefits. Given that we are approaching 6 months since the VA began the process PACT Act claims, it is a good time to take a look at the VA's implementation. I recently had the opportunity to visit the Houston Regional Office, which serves many of my veteran constituents. I heard from the RO's employees about the effectiveness of training and how to process PACT Act claims and their struggles with the toxic exposure risk activities or the terror memo. The regional office employees also discussed receiving inconsistent guidance from VA and how this makes it difficult for them to properly process the claims. I am concerned that the employees were not given enough time to comprehend these training materials, such as the over 70-page training manual, before they began processing PACT Act claims in January of 2023. I think it is safe to say that there is some work that can be done to improve how employees are being trained and supported through this change, which ultimately affects the delivery of benefits to the veterans. I look forward to discussing the department's plans to address these gaps today. I'm also eager to hear about the progress that the VA is making in their technology in order to help work down the backlog. As of April 28th, the VA has received over 500,000 PACT Act claims and processed just over 250,000. There are still many more claims that need to be processed and many more that still have not been filed. VA's IT efforts are critical to ensuring that veterans receive timely and accurate decisions. Finally, the PACT Act establishes a process for the Secretary to conduct research and establish new presumptive conditions based on toxic exposures. I am interested in receiving an update on the status of the VA's research and how this will impact the claims process. I have said this many times before, and I will say it again, veterans are my top priority. I appreciate the work of my colleagues in the last Congress to get the PACT Act across the finish line, but I think there's still a little work to be done. Thank you to all our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to your input and recommendations on this matter. With that, I yield to the Ranking Member Pappas for her opening statement.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and I want to join you in welcoming everyone to our first oversight hearing of this subcommittee for the 118th Congress, and a special welcome to Undersecretary Jacobs, who was recently confirmed by the Senate as VA's new Undersecretary for Benefits at the VBA. I greatly appreciate all of our panelists being here today, and likewise thank you all for those who are in the audience for being a part of this session. It's been a little over 9 months since the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson, honoring our promise to address Comprehensive Toxics Act of 2022, or PACT Act, was signed into law. Since then, the Department of Veterans Affairs has been in the middle of implementing the most significant expansion of veterans' health care and benefits in decades. VA's implementation of the PACT Act is incredibly important for our nation's veterans and their families. As ranking member of this subcommittee, it's my job to ensure that VA has the necessary resources to administer timely benefits decisions, as well as access to world-class health care for all veterans eligible under PACT Act. I also want to commend the department for creating a bi-weekly PACT Act performance dashboard. I know my staff and I can track and measure in real time the overall impact of the PACT Act in terms of its expansion of health care and benefits, measure VA's success in delivering timely support through customer service, VA's outreach efforts, as well as VA's success in hiring the necessary staff to get the job done. At today's hearing, we'll have important topics that we need addressed regarding VA's implementations of the PACT Act. Specifically, I'm interested in discussing the toxic exposure presumption process under Title II, research into the health effects of toxic exposure under Title V, and VA's progress deploying information technology updates needed to process claims, as well as accuracy of claims decisions, and progress reducing the inventory of pending disability compensation claims. I also introduced the VA Workforce Investment and Expansion Act, which included several VA workforce-related provisions and was ultimately included in the PACT Act, so I'm also interested in VA's implementation of workforce development and training for VA personnel with respect to veterans who report toxic exposures. I'm also interested in hearing from our witnesses today about the present implementation challenges and concerns, which is why this hearing is critical, to conduct oversight and speak directly with VA regarding its views and experiences implementing the PACT Act. The first challenge is ensuring that veterans and their families are made aware of and understand the benefits that are available to them because of PACT Act. It's especially important that VA is reaching those veterans in underserved or rural communities, since the bill has several deadlines coming up at the end of the fiscal year. I know that VA has dedicated significant resources to this issue, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that in just a moment. The second biggest challenge, of course, is the increase in disability compensation claims as a result of the addition of 23 new presumptives. Over 500,000 PACT Act claims have been filed by veterans so far, and I'm looking forward to hearing about VA's plans for IT upgrades and the use of automation to address these claims. We'll use this hearing to explore how VA is utilizing those resources and authorities to avoid the risk of overwhelming the system. A third challenge is hiring and training to support the millions of veterans who now have access to expanded care, benefits, and services. I know that VA has aggressively moved in that direction, but there are some concerns that linger, and we want to make sure that we're hearing about efforts to onboard and train new claims processors as we think about the job that remains to be done. So I appreciate you, Mr. Chairman, holding this hearing today. I look forward to everyone's testimony, and I yield back.
I will now introduce the witness panel. Our first witness from the Department of Veterans Affairs is the Honorable Joshua Jacobs, Undersecretary for Benefits. Sir, congratulations on your recent appointment. We also have Ms. Patricia Hastings, the Chief Consultant for Health Outcomes and Military Exposures for the Veterans Health Administration, and Mr. Robert Orifisi, Director of the Benefits and Memorial Service Portfolio for the Office of Information and Technology. Thank you all for being here today. And Undersecretary Jacobs, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee. We appreciate the opportunity to appear before you to discuss VA's implementation of the PACT Act. I'm joined today by Dr. Patricia Hastings, Chief Consultant for the Home Office in VHA, and Mr. Robert Orifisi, Benefits and Memorial Services Portfolio Director for VA's OINT. It's been over 9 months since Congress passed and President Biden signed the PACT Act into law, and more than 5 months since VA began full implementation of the law. In this time, across the agency, it has truly been an all-hands-on-deck effort to prepare for and then execute on the delivery of the new PACT Act benefits and health care. The hard work done by VA's incredible workforce and our amazing partners across the country is producing results. Veterans have filed nearly 570,000 PACT claims since August 10th. We're working diligently to complete them as quickly and accurately as possible, with over 280,000 claims completed. And as we work through each and every incoming claim, we're reminded that behind each claim is a veteran, family member, or survivor. Take Benito, for example, who's a proud Marine Corps veteran. Benito was one of the first to step foot into Kuwait during Operation Desert Shield in 1990. He remembers thinking something was wrong when he saw all those burning oil wells while marching on foot to their objective. When he returned home from the war and left his beloved Marine Corps, he found out that all those burning oil wells impacted his health, and he received documentation from the military doctors to prove it. But when he tried to file claims regarding his exposure in Kuwait, he was denied by VA twice. Benito says the VA doctors told him he was crazy for trying to claim problems from being around those burning oil wells. He eventually received a disability rating of 70% for other conditions. But his treatment by VA back then left him feeling like his service didn't matter and that the VA, of all places, didn't care about what he and his brothers experienced. Now, fast forward 32 years. Benito started receiving and ignoring emails about the PACT Act. But those emails just kept coming, telling him to give VA another chance and that the PACT Act was for him and veterans like him. So he finally called the number in the message, and he was ready for history to repeat itself. But according to Benito, this time was different. Thanks to the PACT Act, VA was able to grant Benito service connection for asthma and chronic bronchitis on a presumptive basis, which increased his disability rating to 100%. Benito finally felt vindicated. He says the extra benefit he now receives goes to helping his mother financially, who's in a nursing home with dementia. For Benito, it means a lot to finally be able to contribute to taking care of his mother in her final days. And today, Benito's taking every opportunity to urge his old Marine Corps buddies and other friends who served to check out the PACT Act and to give VA one more chance, just like he did. This is just one story of the veterans behind the numbers we report and the decisions we make. and we were able to provide benefits to Benito and many others like him because of the months of hard work, planning, and coordination that went into our PACT Act implementation. Even before President Biden signed the PACT Act into law, VA began actively hiring new employees to prepare for the expansion of benefits. In fact, we've increased the VBA workforce by 15% over the last year and a half, and it now stands at more than 28,000. We launched va.gov/PACT, a one-stop shop website for understanding the PACT Act and applying for benefits, as soon as the Senate sent the bill to the President's desk for signing. And we continue to conduct extensive outreach across the country through multiple channels targeted at populations that have traditionally been underserved or hard to reach. We not only made all presumptive conditions effective the day the bill was signed into law, but we also accelerated implementation to January 1st by publishing sub-regulatory guidance instead of regulations, which could have delayed implementation by up to 2 years. We had employees from the Philippines to Puerto Rico volunteer to process PACT Act claims on January 1st, the first day we had the authority to provide these benefits for most veterans. And they worked on the weekend and on a federal holiday so that they could be part of history in helping to deliver benefits to veterans and survivors as soon as possible. And though our effort to start PACT implementation on January 1st was the right veteran-centric decision, it did require us to do a tremendous amount of complicated work in a very short period of time. And we're already applying many of the lessons learned to refine and improve our processes and outcomes moving forward. For example, we've heard about the need to streamline and revise the PACT Act training, about the complexity of applying the new Toxic Exposure Risk Activity, or TIRA, requirements in the law, and about the pressure experienced by our hardworking claims processors, who are doing their best to learn the nuances of this once-in-a-generation legislation while continuing to meet their production and quality standards. We're using this feedback to make improvements to our PACT training as well as our VBA training more broadly. We've also developed a TIRA memorandum tool, which guides employees to make uniform and consistent decisions regarding the application of TIRA. We've extended a quality grace period until the end of May to allow our claims processors time to adjust to the new requirements. And we're increasingly leveraging automated tools to make our employees more effective and efficient. As we continue to implement this new law, we remain committed to an immediate and deliberate forward-leaning approach that tackles questions of environmental exposure through more expansive research and a new streamlined presumptive decision-making process. I want to express my appreciation for your continued support of veterans, for your service in uniform, and for your support of their families, caregivers, and survivors. I also want to acknowledge our VSO partners, as well as others in the veteran community who work with us to execute this historic law and provide the best care and services for veterans and their families. I'd be happy to answer any questions you or the subcommittee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The written statement of the Undersecretary Jacobs will be entered into the hearing record. We will now move to questioning. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Jacobs, thank you so much for that opening remarks, and again, thank you for meeting with me yesterday one-on-one. I really got a lot from our interaction. Mr. Orifici, did I nail it?
Orifici, but that's very close.
Okay, I apologize, my fault. First question for you, sir. The National Work Queue has been a useful tool for ensuring that veterans receive timely decisions. However, the regional office employees lose the ability to learn from the errors because deferred claims are not returned to the person who made the mistake. Is OIT developing functionality in the NWQ to return deferred claims to the person who made the error? So having the opportunity to sit down with the folks, that makes total sense to me. And I can appreciate the complexities and the originality of the effort to send it out to share the workload, okay? But one of the biggest complaints is when it moves up the chain of command, so to speak, and it's not pushed back down to the originator, they lose connectivity on whether or not they made a mistake. It starts completely over with the individual and the veteran. That seems like we could tweak that a bit and make that more advantageous. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. And we have a number of changes that we are putting in right now for National Work Queue to allow for additional rules and how we route the work and how that is distributed to the employees and how it moves back and forth up the chain. We work very closely with VBA, who sets the rules for how that workflow and how those claims flow through the system. And so in terms of the specific rules about what defers back to the employees, I would have to defer to Mr. Jacobs in terms of setting those rules, but we are working on making sure that capability is in the system.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may add, I've asked the team to do a red team review of the national work queue functionality and the capabilities, and I expect feedback and some recommendations by the end of the calendar year. I share your concerns. I think we need to ensure that we're promoting continuous learning. And so right now what happens with the national work queue is if there is an error made and it needs to be sent back, it goes back to the regional office. And based on capacity with the individual rater, they may route it back to the individual employee or they may send it back elsewhere. And so I've asked them specifically about this question, and I mentioned to you yesterday, it's like you've been in some of the meetings I've been holding with staff across the country as well as with the staff that run the national work queue. So this is something we're taking a hard look at, and I've asked the team to do the full-scale review because national work queue has given us the capability to better manage our workload and deliver more benefits to more veterans than ever before, but we need to ensure that as we're doing that, that we're enabling our employees to learn from their mistakes and improve so that they're constantly learning and growing and not making those repeat mistakes.
I can appreciate the challenging of getting something done in a short window, given the scale and scope of this thing, but I would hate to think that if we wait till the end of the calendar year, how many claims will have issues. So then now think about it in that terms. I would ask that we might pressure the department to move on this hurriedly so it's the veterans that are not suffering at the end. Because and you know the frustration, we talked about this, veterans we're a hard group to get a handle on.
Yes, sir.
And if the VA is making these mistakes, and not purposefully, I would never, and again, the employees that I spoke with, every other word is like, it's about the veterans, about the veterans. So and I absolutely respect that. I just want to make sure that we up here in the department are doing what they need to be doing in order to prevent this.
Yes, sir. And we have a number of efforts in addition to the national work queue that provide oversight and assessment of quality of our decisions. And so based on some of the trends that we see, we then follow up and provide reinforced training. So when we see that there are issues, so for example, providing the TIRA memo, we're going to go back and we're going to make sure that, if needed, we're going to provide additional training and reinforce that guidance. And so those are the types of things that we do through in-process reviews, through special focus reviews, and we're particularly sensitive to that given the newness of PACT Act. This is a massive new benefit. And it's not only increasing the total number of claims, but it's adding new complexity to the work process, right? There's a new theory of entitlement. And so, and there are different dates of different effective dates and different conditions that are covered. It's categories of conditions. And so we have to be very focused and disciplined to make sure that we're reinforcing the guidance. And it's one of the key lessons from this implementation is we need to do more and we need to do better on training.
I heard one of the young ladies in Houston say it took years to create the PACT Act and it took months to implement it, and that can be a little overwhelming for them. I'm guessing. So I'll add this, and then because my time's up, but we need to give them exactly what they need to be successful.
Yes, sir. I will say we felt an urgency to get the law implemented. We're dealing with veterans who have, in some cases, waited decades for these benefits, and in some cases are dealing with terminal illnesses. So it's a balancing act, and I think we'll continue focusing on employee feedback and responding appropriately.
Okay. Thanks, sir. I now recognize the Ranking Member Pappas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the way that VA has really been aggressively communicating around the benefits that are available to veterans now through PACT Act. I want to zero in on the August 9th date, which is approaching because veterans will receive benefits backdated to the date of the bill signing in advance of that date. So I'm wondering if you can talk about any major push in advance of August 9th to ensure that veterans know what's available to them.
Yes, Congressman, that's a great point. In fact, right now, this morning, we're having a PACT Act Day of Learning here in Congress. We're holding PACT Act claims clinics across the country in partnership with our VHA partners where we're doing toxic exposure screenings. And we're continuing to push the word out through multiple channels in the media, working with our partners in the VSO community, with states and counties and local nonprofits. We're pushing hard, one, because the PACT Act is a once-in-a-lifetime or a once-in-a-generation opportunity, but it doesn't do anyone any good if they don't know about it. And we have the unique authority, so if a veteran files a PACT claim within the first year of the law's enactment, they have the possibility of backdating their effective date to the date the law was signed, August 10th, 2022. And so we're pushing veterans so that they know they can file that claim before then. And if they don't have all of their materials prepared, they can file an intent to file, so they can effectively have a marker that preserves that potentially earliest possible effective date. And it's also important for them to know they can come to va.gov/PACT and file that claim, or they can work with an accredited representative like a VSO to get that help that they need. And we want them to come. We are actively seeking them out, and we're using data to drive our outreach.
Can you talk about challenges that you've experienced in getting to underserved communities, minority veterans, women veterans, LGBTQ veterans, and how you're addressing some of those challenges?
Yeah, I think we're dealing with a deficit in trust in some cases. I mentioned Benito. There are people who have had experiences with the department that turn them away from seeking the benefits and the support that they've earned. And so we're working to restore that trust through that active outreach and through things like our Veteran Experience effort. We're partnering with the Veteran Experience Office to try to identify the pain points, the moments that matter, and use that data, both the qualitative and the quantitative data that we're getting, to better inform how we deliver services and how we communicate. We're also using data where we can identify on a county-by-county basis the percentage of veterans who are utilizing their benefits, and we're going to drive that outreach to try to target those historically underserved organizations. And then finally, we're working with different special emphasis programs and groups to make sure that we're communicating in culturally appropriate ways. We're here to serve all veterans, not some veterans.
Dr. Hastings, if I can turn to you, I know VA is working to establish new presumptives. Can you talk about VA's plans to publish these new presumptives and how many might be included on the list?
First, I'd like to thank you for the PACT Act. And when we talk about the 24 or so presumptions, it's really not 24 presumptions that you gave veterans. These are buckets of presumptions. So when you look at respiratory cancers of any type, reproductive cancers of any type, digestive cancers of any type, you know, just for respiratory alone, there are over 80 different kinds of cancers because basically it's from the lips to the lining of the chest wall. So thank you very much. It's over 300 presumptions. But we are going to publish in the Federal Register. This is something that's new. We've gotten lots of information in the past from veterans, from VSOs, from Congress, from VA leadership, from the media as to what needs to be looked at next. This is the first time we will be able to publish in the Federal Register and have public comment from veterans and be able to have it on a website so it's open, people can look at it. We are very excited with this opportunity. We are planning on getting that in well before August and starting the public comment. But I also want to say that in my office, we are constantly doing surveillance and looking at trends for the Gulf War, for Vietnam, for K2. So this does not cease. And anytime we find a signal, we look deeper.
Well, thanks for indicating how you're incorporating VSO feedback. I think that's important. And just wondering in the remaining time that I have, if you can touch on domestic exposures and the Guard and Reserve components and how that's being incorporated in research.
Yes, domestic exposures. We are going to be, from the PACT Act, we are doing a deep dive with Fort McClellan. The Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry and EPA have done that in the past, but we're going to be looking at health outcomes. We also look at Camp Lejeune. We are looking at PFAS, and we are also looking at fuels, which, as you may imagine, not only are in a deployed environment, but also used extensively here in the U.S. So we are looking at those garrison exposures.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thanks, sir. Congressman Silf, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Jacobs, I understand that all of the training has not been completed for people that are currently processing claims. It looks to me like you're, rightfully so, looking at quantity right now. What are the quality measures for claims adjudication, and when do you expect training to be complete and quality measures, metrics to kick in?
Sir, we have completed training for our existing employees. We're now providing training for all of the new employees. The quality that we're seeing so far remains relatively high, up in the 90-95% area. We've seen a consistent increase from the start of January 1st, where you would expect as employees are learning the new process, the new theories of entitlement. we've identified some areas where we need to focus in and make sure that we're reinforcing that guidance. But the quality, in fact, remains high. I think the concern is equally high. So our employees come to work, and these are more than 50% of them are veterans. They come to work at VBA because they want to serve veterans, and they want to do a good job. And so we have asked them to do a lot. It's already a complex line of business. They have to understand how to review very complex and lengthy military records and extensive medical information. And the great thing about a presumption is you don't have to develop the nexus. So we're making it easier, and that's the great thing about this process. But the new theories of entitlement are making the way that we've traditionally done the work hard. And so that's created a level of anxiety across the workforce, which is why I've provided the extension of the grace period for quality. But quality remains high, and we'll continue to focus on that moving forward.
Okay, very good. And I see the TARA claims are more complex. Is there any consideration for easing the presumptive claims so that you can focus on the TARA claims? I mean, it is presumptive after all.
Yeah, so the TARA application is being provided for claims that are not presumptive. So we get a claim that has maybe 10 contentions, and if 5 are presumptive, we can make a decision relatively easily based on what's in the evidence. But for those claims that are non-presumptive, so they fall outside the category of the 20-plus areas, we then have a different process. So whereby we used to be able to kind of review the case, and if we couldn't make a decision, we would then send that contention out for a CMP exam. In the cases where we can't provide that benefit, where we would otherwise deny based on the evidence, if there is evidence of a toxic exposure risk activity, we have to send veterans out. And so we're working to understand the impact to the veteran. We're working to understand the impact to the overall system and the timeliness, and trying to make sure that we're giving our employees tools to make those decisions consistently. And so I think we've introduced a tool relatively recently that's kind of like a TurboTax tool where the veteran can answer a series of questions and be guided to make the decision about whether to officially request a TARA exam through the TARA memo. But we're going to be continuing to monitor implementation and coming back to talk through that as we learn more.
Okay, very good. And for Dr. Hastings, you mentioned the Federal Register. What's your timeline for getting that out? Well before the 9th of August. Very good. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Self. Congressman DeLuzio, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, all. I should say congratulations to VBA on accomplishing that 1 millionth CMP exam. Job well done. I know it's an important moment for a generation of veterans, so please keep going. Undersecretary Jacobs, start with you, sir. 2022 OIG report found VBA's contract medical disability exam program was deficient because it wasn't holding vendors or contracted claim exam providers accountable for correcting errors, improving exam accuracy. As I understand it, OIG found all 3 of those vendors were failing to consistently provide VBA with accurate exams required under those contracts. In the time frame of 17 to 20, as I understand it, the worst offender there was providing accurate exams between 66, 74% of the time. I'll start with, how do you assess that performance?
I will say we have measures in place in our contract to evaluate quality and to appropriately incentivize or disincentivize that. And we measure quality using an 11-question checklist to determine the accuracy. It is something, so we monitor it and we hold our vendors accountable to it. I will just say anecdotally, when I travel across the country, this is a regular line of concern that's communicated to me. So I am actively working with the head of our medical disability examination office to ensure that we're getting high quality and timely decisions or examinations from our vendors.
What is your sense of that performance compared to VHA examiners?
I think it's a little bit, I think we look to VHA examiners for some of the more specialized and more complex related contentions. I think by and large, they generally do well. But we certainly do here in an environment where we're providing a significant number of exams, we do hear of outlier cases that need to be addressed. and either have the vendor removed or have corrective action taken. And so I think that the VHA team does a pretty good job as well. I think they do about 10% of our total exams in a given year. And we're sensitive. We always give them the right of first refusal, but they obviously have access priorities that they need to work through in terms of clinical capacity. So there's a workload balance that happens at the regional level.
Well, and you mentioned more specialized exams
Yep.
and issues that I suspect will be more unique to the veterans community, where perhaps the VHA examiners have more expertise, but I don't want to speak for you. Is that the place where you see them most useful or most effective in filling exam requirements?
In some cases, yes. In some cases, it's just a matter of capacity and filling kind of the general needs as well.
Your testimony also mentions VBA's development of PACT Act training, both for the VHA examiners and contract examiners, which
Yep.
I applaud. That's great. I want to understand more broadly the disparities, if there are any, in training of a VHA examiner by virtue of being a VA or government employee, what trainings they might have that a contract examiner is not receiving. Are there such trainings? Are there differences in what those examiners go through to understand veterans, our care, the unique challenges folks face, perhaps coming from service?
Yeah. Well, I think we have incredible training on toxic exposures that Dr. Hastings and her team have done that are provided to not only clinicians, but we also have training that's been provided to our CMP vendors through the 4 contract companies that work with us, but they also are provided the training that is included for our VHA vendors. And I can get you the record and provide the detailed list of the trainings that we provide.
A quick follow-up, though, are there trainings that the VHA folks receive just by virtue of being a VA employee, in addition to what contract examiners might take? Like, for instance, this PACT Act training, I understand both do.
Yes. Yeah, so our VHA employees are going to receive additional training over and above what is required of our vendors, because many of those clinicians also may see patients, and so there are additional requirements associated with that training.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Congressman Franklin, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. Really appreciate it. It's not lost on any of us here, the monumental task you all face in implementing the PACT Act. It's tremendous legislation that's long overdue for our veterans, and they need it. Everyone's patient while they're, it's a great thing to get it out there and rolled out quickly. Patience will wear thin, as you know, with folks who are now waiting to get the care that they've earned and desperately need. I'm curious a little, as I understand from talking to some of the older veterans in our district, when Agent Orange claims were being adjudicated, a lot of that was concentrated into regional offices or sites of expertise. This decision and this implementation is basically to empower and enable everyone across the spectrum to do it. Not trying to second guess that decision, but I am curious so I can help explain to folks why that decision was made and why that's going to be a better thing for the veterans in the long run.
No, thank you very much for that question, and it's a good one. The challenge we have, we often get asked this question, right? So in the case of Camp Lejeune claims, we recently consolidated our processing in the Louisville regional office. And we could do that because we have a relatively small number of pending claims. But for PACT Act claims, they're now about 40% of the total workload. And so as we think about it, and we're constantly pushing for more veterans to file PACT claims. So what we're gonna see in the very near future is PACT being just a regular part of business, and that the total workload being so large that we have to distribute it across the rest of the organization. We just simply don't have the capacity to specialize it in a way that would make sense. Otherwise, veterans would have to wait a very extensive period of time.
Okay. I understand that hiring has been a challenge in keeping up with the numbers that you need. Currently, our understanding is that the staff's required to work 20 hours of mandatory overtime every 2-week period, and that was justification for a budget request of an additional $44 million in this current budget cycle.
Yep.
With Terra claims expected to peak in October of this year, non-Terra, and then the Terra claims peaking in April of 2024. Do you anticipate ever getting caught up, or is this just going to be, the overtime's going to be the way it is till you get past the peak cycles?
So my goal is to move away from mandatory overtime. I don't think it's a sustainable practice.
Never a healthy thing, yeah. Right.
But we also can't yet move away from it completely because of the total workload. We're providing a reprieve to mandatory overtime for several weeks over the summer, and we're going to be looking at that, just like we did over the winter holidays, and that's factored into our modeling. And it's also why we've been aggressively hiring so much. We're pushing more employees so that there are more people to do the work, and it's also why we're investing in things like technology so that our employees are more efficient and effective. And ultimately, we need to move away, but we also have to be able to make sure that veterans aren't waiting lengthy periods of time.
You had mentioned different efforts to work with staffs here and to disseminate education out there about the program. Specifically, I'm thinking about our folks across all of our districts. Our constituent caseworkers are often the first ones to be, to have a veteran reach out and help to navigate the program. Is there training, are there efforts underway or that you have planned that maybe of things we can do to help Congress partner better with your staff?
Absolutely. I worked in the Senate for about a decade, so I'm acutely aware of the benefit that the caseworkers provide. They're often a great signal of things that may not be working well that we need to know about. And so we do provide training to constituent caseworkers through our Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, and I'll follow up, make sure we follow up with your staff afterwards to ensure that they're getting that training, just like we're doing the training on the Hill this morning. I think there are incredible opportunities to work together more closely and more effectively, and we want to make sure if you're seeing issues or problems, that we know about them so we can fix them as quickly as possible, because we want to ensure that those individual veterans that are coming to your office are taken care of, but we also want to understand if it's a broader systems issue that we should know about and we can fix for other veterans and family members.
I appreciate that, and it'll also help us educate and inform our veterans about how to manage expectations and how to navigate it.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thanks, sir. Congressman McGarvey, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by echoing the comments from my colleague, Mr. Franklin. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for the work you do. Thank you for helping all of us make sure veterans get the care they need, they deserve, they've earned. I want to sort of follow up a little bit on the lines that my colleague, Mr. DeLuzio, was talking about and get into this claims processing issue. As you all know, I want to ask about the performance standards and of the rating veteran service representatives, the RSVRs, who are handling claims related to the PACT Act. According to AFGE, RSVRs currently do not receive production credit if they determine a claim needs to be deferred. And you all know how this works. They only receive that production credit if they've been accepted or denied. But this means you can spend hours upon hours on a claim. They don't know exactly what's going on in real time. And then all of a sudden, they get no credit for the work they've put in, only if it's accepted or denied. I think this pressures the people handling claims to make a premature or an incorrect decision. And the result is that it could potentially haunt veterans for years to come. This has been an issue in my district in Louisville, Kentucky, where the Kentucky VA regional office is. And as you know, the Louisville regional office handles a lot of the Camp Lejeune contaminated water claims right now, in addition to some of the other claims. So in the past, Louisville's been a strong performer, but I'm concerned that the current performance standards may undermine both RSVRs and the veterans they serve. So my question for you, Mr. Jacobs, is why doesn't the VA provide production credit for the time spent on claims that are deferred?
Thanks very much for that question, and it's an issue that I've been wrestling with since I came to VBA in the summer. I think that the long-standing approach has been to try to balance the desire to produce decisions for veterans while also providing credit for the employees who are doing the work. And so I think there's been a concern that if you provide credit for deferrals, you're going to incentivize the prolonged processing of the claim and unnecessarily delay decisions for veterans. But what I've learned in the time that I've been in this role is that veterans and employees oftentimes don't have the evidence that they need to make a decision for veterans. And so we've got a committee that is reevaluating our performance standards, and they're taking a very hard look at this question and figuring out how can we balance the need to incentivize the right outcomes and decisions for veterans while appropriately rewarding employees for the work that they've done. And so I don't have an answer for you now, but I'll tell you it is a major focus of the evaluative effort that's underway, and I hope to have an answer for you in the near term.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think you're right. We don't want to see unnecessary delay either, but want to make sure that we get this right and that veterans are getting, again, that care they deserve, that they've earned, and that we don't have a structure in place which is limiting that. So I appreciate that and look forward to continuing to talk with you guys about how that's coming and when it can be implemented. We just want to make sure, again, those performance standards, fair, robust, transparent, and that they reflect both the quality and the quantity of the work done by these people. So just turning quickly in the time I've got remaining to Title V of the PACT Act, which handles the research on toxic exposure. Mr. Jacobs, again, can you provide us with an update on the Interagency Working Group on Toxic Exposure Research outlined in Section 501 of the PACT Act and where the group stands?
Yeah, if it's okay, I'd like to defer to Dr. Hastings, who's
Sure.
been leading our research efforts to speak to that.
501 is managed by the Office of Research and Development, and they have met 4 times since January. They have put together their federal group. It has 39 members, and we had a very large group initially for our first meeting, and we invited all the federal agencies at your behest. And we invited, in fact, Department of Commerce, who knew that Commerce was interested in PFAS because of semiconductors. I learned a lot there. So we have met. They have put the group together. They're also working with the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And so it is a very broad group. They do have a 5-year mandate, as you know, to look at the gaps. And they are taking that very seriously. They've put a charter together. They will have a report to you in this first year and a report every year for that 5 years.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McGarvey. Congressman Sismoni, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for being here today. You know, I know that the VA has been conducting numerous outreach efforts through their regional offices regarding veterans and survivors' eligibility for PACT Act claims since the legislation passed last August. However, it seems also that rural and underserved areas may sometimes be left without some targeted outreach to them. I believe that one of the areas that we could bolster this outreach is through efforts of possibly educating our congressional personnel offices, specifically in the districts, about this to address how these offices can best assist our veteran constituents as well. So my question is, and of course I should have mentioned this initially, I represent Arizona's 6th Congressional District. This is part of the Tucson area, and it also includes 4 other counties besides Pima County, and these other 4 counties are very much in the rural side of the counties. So how can Congress better partner with you at the VA to improve outreach on PACT Act claims in rural and underserved communities?
Thanks very much, Congressman. I think it's incredibly important for us to reach out to veterans, particularly in underserved and hard-to-reach areas like our rural communities. And so our regional office directors across the country have been holding regular outreach events with their partners in the health system, but also with the state and the local, the county veteran service officers and our VSO partners. And I would say one action I can take following up on this effort is to make sure that our Phoenix regional office director, who's been doing a lot of proactive outreach, is partnering with your office to identify opportunities in your district. We have a really incredible tool that we've developed that enables us to identify on a county-by-county basis the percentage of veterans in individual locations that are receiving benefits or not, so we can identify those underserved populations and try to target our outreach efforts there and most appropriately use our resources.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I do think that's highly important, and we want to make sure that every community gets served. I know that many of my colleagues on this committee also serve rural areas, and just that outreach is highly important. Another question here real quick. In terms of new hires, why are new hires who have not gone through the virtual, in-person, or VIP training allowed to process PACT Act claims? Are you considering changing this policy to require them to become proficient in non-PACT Act claims first?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. New hires who have not gone through the VIP training, the virtual in-person training, allowed to process PACT Act claims. Are you considering changing this policy to require them to become proficient in non-PACT Act claims first?
I'm not aware of that, so I'd like to follow up with you. When we have new employees who come on board, we require them to go through VIP training, and then they, depending on if they're a VSR or an RVSR, there are several, it takes a prolonged period of time, several months, and so then they can continue to get that training. They come back and they typically get additional training at the regional office, and so they're ready in 6 to 9 months. To start really being proficient, and then about 2 years to reach to a journeyman level proficiency. So we are taking a hard look at our training overall. So I think one of the things we've learned from the PACT Act implementation is that we've got some areas of improvement for our training on PACT specifically, but I'm taking a much broader look at the VIP training, which is what we provide to all new employees, so that we can have an independent review and make the course corrections that might be necessary to better support continuous learning in an adult learning environment.
You know, this obviously the feedback from the employees themselves. We have traveled to some of the regional offices and heard similar concerns here from the employees directly about the, I would say that the delivery of the training, specifically in-person training. Training mostly provided through PowerPoint or via TMS platform. So this is more meant to be around the area of new hires, and should they be trained on how to generally process claims before they move on to the PACT Act claims? That's more of the nature of the question.
Oh, got it. Now I understand. Thank you for the clarification. I think 40% of our workload is now PACT claims, so I think they need to be taught PACT at the same time they were being taught the regular workload. But I think the broader point you're making is a correct one. We need to take a fresh look at how we're providing training to ensure that our new employees are set up for success moving forward. We've increased our workforce by more than 15% in the last year and a half, and we're continuing to hire more. So at the same time, we're asking our existing employees to do more, to process more claims, deliver more benefits to more veterans, and we're adding complexity through this new theory of entitlement and new ways, new effective dates and new ways of doing business. We're adding all of these new employees who are absolutely critical for us to be able to meet this growing demand, which we're excited to meet. But all of that creates an environment where there's a lot of change. And so we need to be very disciplined in terms of how we're rolling out our improvements and be vigilant in terms of doing oversight to ensure that our new employees and our existing employees are getting the support that they need. So we're taking care of employees so that they can take care of veterans.
Thank you. Mr. Trout, you're back.
Thank you, sir. Congresswoman Ramirez, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Orificy.
Great. Thanks very much for that question. We're excited that the PACT Act is allowing us for the first time to establish breast cancer as a presumptive service condition under the PACT Act. And we've worked with our Center for Women Veterans to conduct specific outreach in a variety of different forums, working with a number of our partners outside of government. But one of the things that I was hearing just prior to this hearing is that we need to do more outreach, that not everyone is aware that breast cancer is covered as a presumptive service-connected condition. So I'm taking away from just the conversation I had that we need to double down on this. I think one of the incredible things about this law is that it's massive in scope and scale. It's got more than 20 conditions and categories of conditions that we're now able for the first time to provide presumptive service connection for. And it's got additional dates of coverage and service, but all of that means that it's highly complex. There are a lot of different parts and pieces and nuances. So communicating that is really important. And that's why we're doubling down on our outreach. It's why we're holding the Day of Learning here in the Capitol. It's why we've had outreach with active duty at the Pentagon and with our military components and bases across the country, and why we're working with partners in many places, in many communities. But I think we're going to have to continue to do more specifically here based on some of the conversations I've just had this morning.
Thank you, and I would love if you keep me posted on how the outreach efforts are going.
Yep.
Obviously, it's really important for all of us. I want to follow up more on claims now. The Veteran Benefit Administration to this point has managed all of the incoming claims, PACT Act claims, and the backlog effectively. And although the backlog of claims has not increased, there's currently about 210,000. It has not been effectively reduced. Under Secretary Jacobs, currently the VBA has over 800,000 pending claims. Can you tell me a little bit about the actions that are being taken to reduce these numbers? And also, how long before new claims processors are in place?
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for that question. You know, in fiscal year 2022, we set a record for the highest number of claims decisions in VBA history, and that was 1.7 million claims decided. That beat the previous year's record by 12%. We're about halfway through this fiscal year, and we're already well above where we were last year. We've produced 15% more claims at this point in fiscal year 23 than we had in the same point last year. And thanks to the outreach and the incredible new benefits under the PACT Act, we've received 30% more more claims than we did last year. And so we have, in preparation for the PACT Act, we put together a people process technology implementation plan. So before the law was passed, we started an aggressive hiring campaign, and we brought on about 2,000 additional new employees. We have continued that aggressive hiring campaign with hiring fairs across the country, and over the last year and a half, we've increased our total workforce at VBA by about 15%. So we're now over 28,000, and we're going to be quickly approaching 29,000. And because of this investment and the advanced planning, we're now producing more claims than ever before. We completed our millionth claims decision in April, which is about a month before we did last year. And in the middle of April, April 17th, for the first time in our history, we completed more than 9,000 claims decisions in a day. And in fact, we've completed more than 8,000 claims decisions more than 40 times this fiscal year, which is something that we had never done. We'd only done 6 times in our history before.
Thank you so much. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, ma'am. Congressman Crane, you're recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. You know, you walk into a hearing late and I'm sitting here and my colleague from Arizona has already read 3 of my questions. It's unbelievable, Juan. Thought better of you, man. All right. Thank you guys for appearing today. Thank you for your work to support one of our most cherished groups, our nation's veterans. I'd like to start with Mr. Orifici. Did I pronounce that right, sir?
Orifici, but close enough. Thank you.
Can you say that again?
Orifici.
Okay. Orifici?
Orifici.
All right. I'm just gonna do the best I can.
Just go with sir.
There you go. All right. Mr. O, how's that? All right.
That works.
When does VA project automated decision support technology will be fully functional and able to meaningfully reduce the backlog of claims?
So thank you for that question. Within OIT, we do a lot of work to enable the automated decision work in terms of providing data and integration with the Veterans Benefits Management System and other systems that are used to process claims. And ADS is managed by service providers by VBA, so Mr. Jacobs would have to answer the exact deployment days for when that ADS would go.
Go ahead, Mr. Jacobs.
Yeah. So right now we have about 57 automation-eligible diagnostic codes that are in production, and 26 of those are PACT-specific conditions. We have processed, we had 166,000 claims that have utilized automation. 30,000 of those have been completed, and we've had about a 10% overall avoidance for automation. So what we're doing right now is we started with 4 prototype sites, 4 regional offices, where we're continuing to implement the technology and then using the frontline feedback from our employees to revise the logic and provide user interface design changes. We then expanded it to 8 prototype sites, and we're closely approaching the deployment to an additional 8 regional offices that are going to be pilot sites. So we're continuing to expand the utilization of our automation, but we're being very careful to do so. We're taking a verify, validate, graduate approach where we're testing the technology, we're getting the feedback, and then we're expanding capacity. So the date is a little hard because we're using an agile methodology.
Can you give me a ballpark, Mr. Jacobs?
I think
A loose ballpark?
in the next year and a half,
Okay.
2 years is the goal, but there are a number of assumptions here that we have to validate before we're ready to do it. And the reason, if I may,
Yes, sir.
we want to make sure this technology is going to enable us in the medium to long term to reduce the workload demands from our employees by automating many of the administrative tasks. But we need to ensure that we've made policy changes that may be required, that we've adopted change management, and that our employees trust what they're getting as well as the veterans we're serving.
Right.
And so we've got a very specific change management approach that we need to follow and ensure that we're delivering this new tool with confidence.
Thank you, sir. Mr. O, again, please explain why the virtual regional office platform that is in development is necessary to support automated benefits delivery tools.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. So the virtual regional office tool, the VRO, is used to help communicate between all of the service providers in the VA. So it provides the bridge between other service providers that VBA has brought on board to help us with the total capacity to develop ADS, and helps it integrate back into the system and other tools that our claims processors use, like VBMS, or to connect into some of the health data repositories that are on the VHA side, so it helps connect into Capri and other systems where medical data may be relevant and brought to bear for helping determine ratings and other decisions.
Thank you. Can you also describe the smart search tool that VA is developing and explain how this tool will make the claims process more efficient?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So Smart Search is a new feature that we're developing for the Veterans Benefit Management System, and it goes and looks in the Veterans e-folder where all their documents are currently stored. Today, a claims processor could go in and search on individual documents that are in the e-folder. So if they're looking for a various condition, they're looking for something like that, they have to go in document by document and search, and the e-folder could have thousands of documents in it. A Smart Search will allow the search to conduct the search across the whole entire e-folder at one time, also reading handwritten notes and images and other harder to discern text that's in those documents that is very difficult for them to review today.
Thank you. And my final question is for Secretary Jacobs. How is VA planning to leverage the required in-office days for employees to improve the quality of claims? For example, would you support using the in-office days for mandatory in-person training?
Yeah, well, we're taking a holistic look at all of our training right now. And so I've commissioned an independent review of our training. And one of the things we're looking at is in addition to how we design and implement the modality of training, the actual substance of it, and kind of think through things like adult learning, we're thinking about in-person versus virtual. With respect to in-person more broadly, we're taking a hard look at the OMB memo that was issued, and we're responding to that based on their request for recommendations focused on organizational health and production. What I will say is that over the last 2 years, our VBA employees have done an incredible job. They pivoted on a dime. Thanks to the work of our IT colleagues and the work about a decade ago when we transitioned from a paper-based process where the floors were literally crumbling under the weight of all the paper claims to one that is now electronic, we were able to survive COVID and continue delivering benefits to veterans for the most part. And we have increased total production in FY21 and FY22 in a largely remote environment, and we've also increased total productivity. So notwithstanding the challenges of the massive change in a very short period of time, I'm incredibly proud of our employees and their ability to deliver to veterans, and confident that they'll do so no matter what happens moving forward.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Does any member have a second round of questions? Chair recognizes ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Orifici, maybe if I could ask this of you. You talked a little bit about technology, and the committee's heard for many years about frustration from VBA staff about VBMS and how the system doesn't always support their work in an ideal fashion. So I'm wondering if you could address this question about survey data and whether VA has conducted a user satisfaction survey recently of VBMS users, and if any of that data will inform future developments of the system. This is something that GAO recommended both in 2016 and 2020.
Thank you for that question. I'm not aware of any surveys from the Office of Information Technology, and we usually defer those surveys to VBA to conduct with their field. And so I'll turn it to Mr. Jacobs.
I'll have to get back to you for the record because I don't want to misspeak here on the surveys. I know that I talk regularly when I'm traveling to the regional offices with frontline staff who use our systems. And I think one of the great things about the PACT Act is that it included a requirement in Section 701B to create a 5-year IT modernization plan. And so we've been working very closely with our IT partners. I've been working with our CIO, Mr. Del Bene, on an approach that we delivered, and it's been articulated. It's about 100 pages, so some light reading on the flight home. But it articulates our modernization vision about how to continue to evolve VBMS. We clearly need to keep moving forward. Technology evolves at a rapid pace, and we need to do our best to evolve with it and skate to the puck. We don't want to invest in yesterday's technology. We want to continue to provide our staff the tools and the support and the resources that they need to better serve veterans. And I think as you look at that document, that will reflect some of the feedback we've received from employees, but also a vision about how we're going to address that.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to more information on that. I've got another question, but I'll submit it for the record in the interest of time, and I'll yield back.
Thank you, ranking member. Thank you, Undersecretary Jacobs, Dr. Hastings, and Mr. Orifici. Yeah? Yeah, man, it's going to be a good day. Have a blessed day. You're excused. I now call the second panel. You're free to join us, please. You all ready? All right. Today we have several representatives from the Veteran Service Organizations, Mr. Michael Black, National Service Director for American Veterans and Vets, U.S. Air Force retired Colonel Lori Finner, Director of Government Relations for the Services Women's Actions Network, and Mr. Alex Morosky, Deputy Director of Government Affairs for the Wounded Warrior Project. Sir, are you a veteran?
I am, sir. Army.
Thank you all three for your service. Mr. Black, you're now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. As the largest veteran service organization representing all of American veterans, AMVETS is honored to provide testimony regarding VA's administration of the PACT Act. AMVETS is America's most inclusive congressionally chartered veteran service organization. Our membership is open to all active duty, reservists, guardsmen, and honorably discharged veterans. Accordingly, members of AMVETS have contributed to the defense of this nation in every conflict since World War II. AMVETS is grateful for the hard work of this subcommittee, for its many years of consideration for the suffering faced by our veterans who are exposed to horrific and, in many cases, life-ending illnesses. The PACT Act is providing medical care and benefits to an incredible number of veterans and their loved ones. We welcome your strong and committed support for the estimated 4 million Vietnam War, peacetime, Gulf War, and post-9/11 veterans who become eligible for VA health care and disability benefits when President Biden signed the PACT Act into law on August 12, 2022. The law improves access to VA treatment for various toxic exposures experienced by our service members during their military service. AMVETS applauds VA's performance, including VBA, and for their diligent efforts toward transparency and proactive communications regarding the PACT Act. AMVETS believes VA has done what it can to ensure positive outcomes for veterans. We remain concerned about accurate effective dates, accurate percentage ratings, and accurate decisions for service connection for PACT Act claims. We have also concerns surrounding the lack of robust data that prevents us from addressing VBA rating decision outcomes. According to VA, as of May 13th, veterans and survivors have filed more than 567,000 new disability claims for toxic exposure-related benefits under the PACT Act since August 10th, 2022. As of May 13th, 2023, 352,000 claims remain pending. VA's PACT Act reports would be more helpful if we knew how VA calculates their received, pending, and completed claims. VA should also report on the number and type of reviews filed and the number of appeals filed, as it is equally important to understand the entirety of the PACT Act claim life cycle. This information is essential should there be a percentage or should there be a change in the PACT Act or a court opinion that alters how VBA processes and decides PACT Act claims in the future. Other recommendations shared by our members involve providing rating decision accuracy, communicating clear staffing information to stakeholders, and continuing to hire new and capable staff to handle the nearly 1.6 million total VBA inventory. AMVETS wants VA to keep the over 212 newly service-connected veterans, plus the 222,000 newly enrolled veterans informed and educated. AMVETS fully understands the complex and lengthy process of how VA implements new regulations for a large and complex law such as the PACT Act. However, after 9 months, we note that VBA has only issued sub-regulatory guidance. We strongly urge VA to publish regulations for the PACT Act so there is a greater clarity in rating decisions as well as greater overall transparency. On behalf of AMVETS, thank you for the opportunity to share our concerns and recommendations to ensure that this law is successful and meets the intent of Congress. I look forward to answering your questions and working with you towards supporting our nation's veterans who rely on this law to improve their wellness and quality of life. This ends my statement.
Thank you, Mr. Black. The written statement of Mr. Black will be entered into the hearing record. Colonel Fenner, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman, Ranking Member, rest of the committee members. Service Women's Action Network is so happy to be here today. We don't often get invited, but I won't echo what the other VSOs say because we largely, if not always, agree. I'm going to highlight what we see from our members who are predominantly women. I'll just give you some highlights, and we're happy to follow up with questions, examples, work with your staff. First of all, research is, of course, the foundation and is longer term. We'd like to commend Dr. Hastings. Her work is really excellent. The whole group is very well positioned. However, what we'd like to emphasize and see more of in the future is that grant and research funding language specifically calls out gender and racial and ethnic minorities so that those veterans will see themselves in the results and get faster screening and testing. In addition, we're very happy that infertility has taken a strong point in all of this. We'd like to commend the VA for, in other areas, doing their holistic care. And what we recognize with infertility is it doesn't just stop at the damage caused by toxic exposure, but that in and of itself, it relates to a lot more challenges that women face, and they shouldn't have to pay out of pocket for that additional care that's directly related to what they've experienced with toxic exposure. We do want to thank Congress for adding significant funding last year to start this year on women's health care, particularly because OBGYN facilities have been lacking, and the VA can now build that capability out. We hope there won't be any reverses on that front. I appreciate Representative Ramirez bringing up breast cancer. Our members report that it's not so intuitive in the IT system to find breast cancer under reproduction. So that's an outreach thing that we think is an easy fix for veterans to be able to find that more easily. Most importantly, related to the recent advisories on women getting screened and treated earlier, we would like to say that active duty and service women exposed to toxins should get their screening as young as 20 or 30 years old, even if they don't have a family history. And here goes another thanks for Congress, passing the Dr. Kate Hendricks Thomas Act last year. Dr. Thomas was a SWAN member who also died last year at the age of 39 from breast cancer from toxic exposure. One of the other things we talk about quite a bit is why women veterans don't come to the VA as often as their male counterparts. VAs and VSOs have gone a long way to make women more visible, and that's been very helpful. Some of the pre-9/11 women veterans don't see themselves as veterans or as deserving. If we could do specific outreach to those pre-9/11 older women, that would take us a long way. It's also hard to feel respected as a woman when you walk into the VA and you're assumed to be somebody's wife, mother, or daughter, which we probably are, but not to be assumed to be the veterans ourselves. That lack of respect also feeds that culture that we've been working on for decades, and all of you in the VSOs have tried to help. But this needs constant work, continuous work for as far as we can see ahead. The VA, what this causes is abuse and assault, frankly. And the VA should re-recognize and re-energize its IRC that is equivalent to the DOD's. It started an independent one, and it needs to be re-energized. And Congress should pass the Empowerment and Support Act. We agree that communications and outreach is essential. The VA, the VSOs, the Center for Women Veterans are all positives. But since it's essential to get this word out and follow through on those claims, we think that claims processing and this outreach should not be considered an administrative expense, but the cost of providing care for veterans that deserve it. I'm hoping that you have questions for me so I can dispense with the rest of this, except to say where women veterans are reporting that they're not getting the care, we'll continue to partner with you, with the other VSOs, and call attention to women's care. Thank you.
Thank you, Colonel. The written statement of Colonel Fenner will be entered into the hearing record. Mr. Morosky, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to deliver your opening statement.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Wounded Warrior Project to participate in today's hearing on the delivery of disability benefits under the Sergeant First Class Heath Robinson Honoring Our PACT Act. Wounded Warrior Project was proud to support the passage of the PACT Act last year, and we share and appreciate the subcommittee's continued commitment to the successful implementation of this historic law. The PACT Act addressed one of the most significant challenges that veterans have faced for many years: difficulty accessing VA care and benefits for toxic exposure-related health problems. To address a range of issues, it established over 20 new presumptive conditions related to burn pits and other exposures, conceded exposure and required exams for veterans suffering from conditions that are not presumptive, established a permanent working group to continuously study whether new presumptive conditions should be created, and guaranteed access to care for all exposed veterans. Together, these provisions represent the largest expansion of VA care and benefits in decades. VA deserves praise for moving swiftly on implementation, which has been successful, but also leaves some opportunities for improvement. But before we discuss those topics, we'd like to share the story of a warrior named Dan to help illustrate the positive impact that the PACT Act's having. Dan was an Army infantryman who served in Iraq. In 2004, he lost his leg when his vehicle was struck by a roadside bomb. Eventually, his other leg would have to be amputated as well. Dan credits part of his recovery from his wounds, both visible and invisible, to his involvement with Wounded Warrior Project's adaptive sports program, and eventually he'd become a yoga instructor, living a healthy lifestyle. But in late 2021, Dan would learn how daily exposure to burn pits in Iraq had finally caught up with him. A colon cancer diagnosis took Dan by surprise, and chemotherapy followed. His perspective on all of it has changed since the PACT Act became law. In Dan's words, "I think it's really important, too, outside of VA compensation, that the PACT Act may make some veterans say, 'I was in Iraq or Afghanistan, and I know I was exposed to all kinds of toxins, so maybe I should go get a colonoscopy. Maybe I should get a chest x-ray.' It's an opportunity to catch something before it becomes bigger." Today, Dan continues receiving treatment for his cancer, which VA now officially recognizes as service-connected. Mr. Chairman, we hope this story helps illustrate the potentially life-saving impact that the PACT Act is having on so many veterans like Dan. As previously mentioned, we believe that VA's implementation of the PACT Act has been largely successful. As of May 6th, they've received over 546,000 PACT Act-related claims, representing over 1/3 of all the claims received since the bill became law. We realize that this increased workload presents certain challenges, but we believe it's necessary to ensure that exposed veterans are finally able to access the benefits they earned. VA's been on the right track with its successful use of automated decision support technology and continued recruitment and training of claims processors made possible by the PACT Act. Congress should continue supporting both components with full funding to help ensure that veterans aren't waiting too long to receive the care and benefits they need. For those who sought relief shortly after the PACT Act was passed, the results have been promising. VA's granted nearly 80% of the 266,000 claims it's processed so far. This represents a significant improvement over the less than 1/3 grant rate that Wounded Warrior Project Annual Warrior Survey respondents reported before the passage of the bill. Still, we've noticed a degree of inconsistency with the way some PACT Act claims are processed, particularly when VA has sought unnecessary exams and nexus opinions when the evidence on file is sufficient to grant the claim. If not caught by a service officer, these unnecessary exams can slow down the claim, and if the exam results in a negative opinion, could also result in an incorrect denial. We encourage VA to consider whether or not supplemental training or perhaps specialized processing teams may be beneficial to increase consistency and accuracy of claims processing. And lastly, we believe that VA's outreach efforts to VSOs and veterans has been exceptional. From their PACT Act Week of Action in all 50 states to town halls and awareness events that Wounded Warrior Project staff have personally attended, to claims clinics and outreach letters mailed directly to veterans and survivors, VA is clearly committed to reaching as many potential beneficiaries as possible. VA's PACT Act webpage is highly informative and easy to navigate, and their biweekly PACT Act performance dashboard is a model of transparent communication. Wounded Warrior Project commends VA for their robust outreach and supports their continued efforts to educate potentially eligible veterans and survivors about PACT Act benefits. Chairman Luttrell, Ranking Member Pappas, this concludes my statement. Once again, I'd like to thank you for inviting Wounded Warrior Project to testify today. I look forward to any questions you or other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you. The written statement of Mr. Morosky will be entered into the hearing record. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Colonel, does your organization deal with the PACT Act at all directly now with?
organizations say if they have a legal problem with a claim, then DAV and some of the other bigger organizations can help. So we do deal with PACT directly. Yes, sir.
As this implementation starts to develop, I heard, and I give, you said the VA is doing a great job.
Yes,
Mr. Morski said that, Mr. Black, you mentioned that too. But then there's the tweaks, right? It's the subtleness of it that's, I think will get it on completely on its rail. Can you, because in the previous panel, we had the privilege of hearing from the Undersecretary reading us in, but I'd like to hear from the VSOs on what your thoughts would be on subtle implementations or subtle tweaks to the rules, regulations that are in place that might benefit not only the VA, but help Congress keep everybody informed. You want to start with you, sir?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things that we're asking VA to consider as they look to increase some of the quality and consistency of their claims processing, things like unnecessary terror exams that we're seeing, things like maybe missing some of the conditions on the list, is to maybe...
Is that redundancy as far as on the terror exam, or is that, can you clarify what you think is unnecessary for me?
Sure. So terror exams are required by the PACT Act only if the evidence in the claim is insufficient to grant without the exam. And so when you're talking about presumptive claims, very often if you have evidence of service in a covered location and you have a diagnosis of a covered condition, that in and of itself should be enough to grant the claim. There's no nexus opinion needed. The terror claims are really necessary when it comes to conditions that are not presumptive. And so very often what we're seeing is those unnecessary claims for veterans who are claiming a presumptive condition. This can mean an unnecessarily appointment that the veteran has to go to, and it could even result in a negative nexus opinion that could impact the claim. So that's one of the things that we're seeing, and that we're reaching out on a regular basis whenever we catch it to VBA to have it corrected.
What is the response from the VA reps that, when you're speaking to them, what are they saying to you about that?
You know, ideally they'll correct it and they'll realize that that was made in error. And you know, we've had VBA claims processors say, you know, thank you for catching that. That helps.
Because we're trying to figure out exactly where the breakdown in the communication is. Fair enough?
Yes.
Mr. Black, you got anything to add, sir?
Thank you. Pretty much everything he said is correct with the Wounded Warrior Project. The part that we're seeing is that sometimes the VA doesn't react fast enough, and we have to basically turn the claim in.
What is fast?
Trying to get hold of somebody at one of the regional offices to actually take a second look at the claim. So we have to turn around sometimes and take those claims and actually turn them into a VBA appeal. And that's what's adding on to the length of the claim.
What does that drag out to? Weeks, months?
That could drag out to, with VBA, probably years.
Okay. How do we solve that problem?
Basically, was that that's part of my whole question and stuff for the VA is quality control. Basically, and training for their training for their employees, because a lot of them, the information is right there. They have boots on the ground by using their DD-214. We've turned in all the medical evidence, and that's one of the big things that AMVETS is known for. We turn in fully developed claims. So before we turn in a claim, we turn in all medical evidence. We turn in DD-214s, members' information for the family, excuse me. We turn in everything at one time. So we turn over everything to the VA in one packet.
And that's that what you're turning over is guidance. I don't know if I want to.
Correct.
Mr. McGarvey, are you going to ask that question again that you asked? Okay, I'm not going to steal your thunder then. No. I'm sorry, sir, go ahead.
So they have everything at hand. It's just that the knowledge of some of the raters and everything that we have at the VA is missing certain items. And that's where I go back to the training, and we keep talking about training, but training is one of the biggest issues we're having right now.
Okay, thank you. I now recognize the Ranking Member Pappas for his line of questioning.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our panel. We're glad that your voices are part of this conversation. Colonel Fenner, I was hoping to be able to start with you. You mentioned infertility, and we know that It can be a symptom of many of the presumptive conditions under PACT Act. It can also be the result of treatment for a lot of those illnesses as well. And you talked a little bit about holistic care. Do you want to expand upon what you said and how that's such an important concept, especially for some of the female veterans that you represent?
Absolutely, sir. And again, we recognize that the VA does a great job in other areas with holistic care through the PCMs and such, so we'd like to see that concept here. What happens when a person learns that they're infertile or has been trying a very long time? Anxiety and depression. We have mental health issues. The breakup of families because of these kinds of stressors. Having infertility be a result of MST adds another layer of complexity, which is why we want that addressed both on it from active duty transition and then also MST possibly experienced at the VA itself. So we're just trying to make a very complex problem more complex in your understanding that specifically infertility is a very difficult problem for us.
And can you talk at all about the experience of women veterans with the VA disability claims process? And I'm interested particularly in their experiences in scheduling disability medical exams, anything that you've observed.
Yes, sir. Some of our veterans are reporting that they get their notice that they've got a 10% disability presumptive, and then they're asked if they want to have an evaluation, knowing that they've had other exposures possibly outside the time limit, Gulf War or flying out of Turkey instead of some of the places recognized where they're flying out of toxic airspace. They click yes, that they would like to have a further evaluation, and then silence. So that's one problem. Another problem is that when they get to see the claims people in person, finally, that person generally will kind of try to defer as well, to say, well, you already have to have an every 2-year evaluation for your disabilities. So why don't you wait until that comes up so that then you can have your toxic exposure further examined. And we're talking about other illnesses, again, that they get the 10%, but they know that they have more that's being affected, and so they're trying to pursue that, and sometimes running up against brick walls. And we know this is a hurried effort, and we appreciate that. We know people are still in training, but we find that at a lot of the local areas, the claims investigators and the people that our veterans are going to are not well informed. Thank you.
Is there any concern around the rejection of claims among certain populations of female veterans with respect to their male peers?
Well, we also talk about combat designations and combat area designations. Sometimes women veterans are not given the status, especially some of the older ones, because women were barred from combat. Now, even after women were allowed in combat, they were classified as not combat MSOs or MOSs, skill sets, but they were attached to combat units instead of in combat units. And that can make all the difference in the world. Whether it's true or not, whether it's covered by PACT or not, the people who see women veterans don't see us in the same light as many of our male counterparts.
Well, thank you for those thoughts. Mr. Moravsky, if I could ask you a question. You talked about the outreach effort that's been ongoing from VA. You credited them with some success, and certainly VSOs have been doing their own work. We also know that there are many veterans who are not connected to a VSO or certainly not connected to care. PACT Act is a great opportunity, and I'm wondering if you have any suggestions for that slice of the veteran population that is out there, that is not engaging with VSOs, has not yet accessed VA care, or may have some frustrations with VA. How do we reach them?
It's a difficult question, and asking specifically about veterans who may not be engaged with either VA or VSOs. It's, I guess, to continue using all the tools at our disposal, whether that's social media, whether that's traditional media, using everything at our disposal to help to talk to those veterans who haven't engaged yet.
It's an unfair question for 20 or 30 seconds that you had, but I appreciate that. We certainly appreciate the work of all of our VSOs. We thank you for your contributions as part of this panel. Look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Franklin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, panel, for being here. As we discussed with the previous panel, this is monumental legislation. Now the hard work is actually getting it done. And the work you all do to inform and educate and be alongside our veterans is tremendous, and we really appreciate that. I'd love to hear from each of you in the time we have, if you could discuss how the VA is working alongside VSOs to inform and educate vets on the benefits of this program. And then also, what can be done to better improve collaboration? And start with you, Mr. Black.
Thank you, sir. Some of the things that basically I think the VA has done well is like for town hall meetings and putting out fast letters and actually getting communications out electronically inside the regional offices to where my service officers are. That they are doing very, very well at. On some of the things to actually do a little bit better is actually the numbers. That's the main thing that we're having some issues with, actually knowing denial rates and everything else for certain conditions so we can basically get it out to the veterans.
So they should share more transparency on the numbers that they're seeing?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Colonel?
We would echo that as well. All of the numbers and the dashboards are great, but it doesn't really inform on the declination rate or the denial rate. Also, we think the relationships are great. We get a lot of information. What we can't really measure, and that helps our caseworker, that helps us, and we also get the information out to our members with BLAST as well. But what we don't see as much of is that evaluation of how it's going. How is that outreach going? The VA is working so fast, they're spinning so fast, that a lot of times there's that pause for assessing not just what the outcome is, we did a lot of stuff, but what the impact really is. And until we see those numbers of women go up who recognize themselves and actually will use the VA, we kind of feel that there's more work to be done in that area. Thank you.
Mr. Morosky?
And I'd also agree with the other two panelists that the data has been robust, but there's more things that we'd still like to see. I'd also point out that as far as their communication with us, they include PACT Act briefings regularly on just about every engagement they have with us, even if it's on another topic. So if it's a Veterans Experience Office briefing, there's a PACT Act component. If it's a family caregiver briefing, we've had PACT Act components to that. We've had VA invite us to off-site briefings with members of their staff from different regional offices. There's been a lot of engagement with VSOs. If there's something that I think they could do better just from a communication standpoint in general, maybe not do better, but just continue to emphasize as we get closer to them, is we've got two big deadlines coming up. We've got the August 10th deadline, which we talked about in the previous panel, which veterans have until really August 9th of this year to have their PACT Act claims backdated to the day the bill was signed. And then we also have a September 30th deadline for veterans who were discharged over 10 years ago to be able to access care before they are subject to a phase-in. And so we'd like to see robust communication to veterans and VSOs about those two upcoming deadlines as we get closer to them.
All right, thank you. Mr. Black, you touched on this already a little bit, but could you expand some more on the concerns you raised in your testimony regarding the inaccurate ratings that veterans have received from their PACT Act decisions?
Yes, sir. I guess for the accurate ratings, that is one of the biggest things, and like I said, that kind of goes back to what I talked about a little bit earlier with training. We're trying to make sure that the veterans is turning in all their evidence. The evidence is in there, but a lot of times with the lack of training on the VA side, the raters will undercut a rating. Instead of basically giving 20% for or 60% for a cancer, they may give 10% for a cancer.
Do you think that's a lack of understanding, or what would be the motivation there?
I think it's a lack of understanding, and I think it's a lack of training. And that takes time. I've learned that for my 17 years as a service officer, it takes time to actually train somebody. You can't just pick up the job and do it. It normally takes an average service officer about 2 to 2.5 years, almost 3 years to learn his job. So that's why we're basically making the comment now about that we're seeing issues that they need to sit there and get the younger service or the younger VA employees trained. I'm sorry, that's it.
That's okay, and I'm over my time. I appreciate that. Now you'll back.
Thanks, sir. Mr. McGarvey, you recognized for 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to start by following up on your line of questioning just a little bit here. We've talked about this. We don't want to have unnecessary delay. At the same time, we want to make sure that veterans are getting the care they've earned. Talk to us a little about your recommendations for performance standards, and then along with the performance standards, given the line of questioning by Mr. Franklin, also recommendations for getting new training and how you would like to see that done.
Thank you, sir. I'm not sure if I could totally answer that because I don't know how the VA goes out and trains their employees. I know they use TMS and some of the other issues. I can't totally answer that question for you. I'm sorry.
Totally okay. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Colonel, Mr. Morosky?
Sir, I can also say we don't necessarily have an inside view on how VAs conducted their training so far. We always encourage, supplemental training whenever possible. I can tell you that Wounded Warrior Project service officers like AMVETs are highly trained individuals. We have a training management team, and we actually, took a pause from everything everyone was doing to train PACT Act when the regulations came out. And so that was, successful for us.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'll switch gears a little bit on you then, and instead of going to talking about the training and the performance standards, which is people who've already contacted the VA, we'll talk a little bit about outreach and how you get more people into the VA, and then hopefully we can make sure people are getting what they need. Colonel Fenner, I really appreciate your service and for you highlighting the unique needs of our women veterans. In your testimony, you spoke about the harmful effects of toxic exposure for women veterans and how more research is needed to talk about the impact for everything from infertility to breast cancer. We also know, as you highlighted, that women may be less likely to go to the VA. Since the VA carries out these large-scale outreach efforts, we want to be doing everything we can to make sure we're reaching our women vets. What do you think the VA should be doing better to reach out to women veterans, and how would you rate their current efforts?
Again, we compliment the VA because this is complex. They've done a great job in a very short time. My colleagues were talking about the efforts that they make and the papers and the news and the flyers and the email blasts. And they're all great, but they very seldom kind of target some of the populations that are coming to us. Whether it's women or other minorities, and we of course support the other minorities as well. Oftentimes we're the only ones in the room that get to talk about racial and ethnic minorities and LGBTQ and so on. So to include in all that training the specific reference to women so that when women get that news and they look at it, they can easily find themselves and then pursue their avenues. The VA has put out a fact sheet for women on PACT. It doesn't say you can find breast cancer under reproduction. It doesn't really talk about the complexities of these things. There's a very small section in the upper left-hand corner that is fantastic, and the rest of it is pro forma, rather. So while we compliment them, we also try to give feedback to them and to you about how this could be more effective. I would say, too, that one of the minorities that we're not reaching with a lot of outreach is those people who have, other than honorable discharges, that were administrative. And it's not too long ago that women were put out of the service for lack of suitability for being pregnant or getting married and adopting their husband's children. Women have been put out of the service for MST that's affected their mental health, and their discharge, the document to discharge says they're unsuitable or ill-adapted. And then there's LGBTQ members who were put out under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and/or got other than honorable discharges. And those populations are not being reached. Thank you for the question.
No, I really appreciate the answer. And obviously, we want to be complimentary of the VA and the work they're doing on behalf of our veterans, but feedback is always important, and you all deal with people who are actually receiving this, and we want to make sure we're reaching all of our veterans for what they've done for us. So appreciate that, and I yield back.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Subcommittee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Black, why do you think that it's important for veterans to not only participate in PACT Act screenings, but also other VA research programs, such as toxic exposure and VA's Million Veteran Program?
Thank you, sir. That's a very good question. I totally believe since the first time when I retired from the Army in 2001 and got out that it's one of the best ways that the VA can track what's going on inside of our bodies. And they can track it over time. I know myself, being a Gulf War veteran from the first half, that was one of the first things that I signed up when I got home. The information and everything that the VA gets, or VHA, from all those is how we figure out what's presumptive and everything that's going on with veterans. So I push, and so does my service officers, push all veterans into these programs and stuff because they help in the long run.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Mr. Black, for your service. Thank you, Ms. Benner, for your service as well, Colonel, and Mr. Morawski. Thank you as well. I've got a question for you, sir. The Wounded Warrior Project mentioned in their testimony that the Veteran Benefits Administration has used a strategy called a special mission in the past when a large number of exposure-related claims happened. This approach was used in improving efficiency, such as radiation, mustard gas, or potentially complex claims. This allows the VBA to train staff on those specific issues to centralize development and processing of these claims to increase accuracy and speed. In the testimony, you encourage the VA to consider whether a special mission will be helpful in PACT Act claims. So can you explain a little bit more on the Wounded Warrior Project believes, why it believes more training may be needed for employees on the cancers that are eligible for a presumption under the PACT Act?
Yes, sir. As was mentioned on the previous panel, there are 23 new disabilities that are listed in the PACT Act, presumptive disabilities, but these are really umbrella categories. So when you have something like head cancer of any type, neck cancer of any type, respiratory cancer of any type, many, many more diagnoses come under each one. And so VA has a number of diagnostic codes under each presumptive disability that they've written in their regulation that they're using to process claims right now. And then in addition to the diagnostic codes, they also have different diagnoses that they don't have diagnostic codes for that are found later on in the document. So there are really 3 different places within the current document that you can find different conditions that veterans may be diagnosed with that could be granted on a presumptive basis. And so sometimes we're seeing claims come back and they're being adjudicated on a direct service connection basis instead of a presumptive because the claims processor wasn't aware that this particular diagnosis fell under this category. And my fellow panelist has talked about breast cancer falling under reproductive cancer. Similar that there are other cancers that are being missed that fall under different umbrella categories. And when we see those, we reach out to VBA and we attempt to get those corrected so that they can be processed on a presumptive basis.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
I want to thank all the witnesses for appearing today to discuss this vital issue. With that, I yield to the ranking member for his closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think there's clearly more to do regarding implementation of what is the most significant expansion of veterans' health care and benefits in decades, and I hope we can continue to work together to perform the necessary oversight. I want to reiterate one final time that VA's implementation of PACT Act is incredibly important to all of the veterans that we serve. It's critical to our staff that we all work together to ensure that the law is implemented expeditiously and in accordance with Congress's intent, and I'm confident that our continued collaboration will ensure that VA provides world-class care to veterans for years to come. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, sir. I absolutely agree 100% with what my colleague just said. Working together, the VSOs working with the Department of Veterans Affairs is, I speak in absolutes. You guys touch so many veterans. They touch so many veterans. I would hate to see us being so siloed would break down that machine, because at the end of the day, inevitably, it's the veterans that'll be suffering. So moving forward, and I have no doubt that this is the case, that we break down those silos and continue to communicate. You receive the training that you need inside your VSOs. That absolutely is on par with what the VA is doing. That line of no more. This is what frustrates me as a scientist, is the fact that we don't like to communicate when something special lives, and that's, again, in this VA space, we can't have that. So I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials without objection. So ordered. This hearing is adjourned.